Oh, we starting? Where's it? Oh, hey, hi. Thanks everyone for coming to my talk. I guess someone had to stand up for the Linux desktop, and that person, I guess, I nominated myself to do that. So we're going to talk about reasons why you should use Linux as your desktop operating system, and hopefully I don't get too many things thrown at me because the chairs look really heavy. This morning I did upload the slides to the GitHub repository. There's several references to it in the talk. So if you want one of the scripts I go through or the slides, it's all in my GitHub repository. So I believe that now is the time to have this conversation. I've been using Linux for a really long time, which just makes me old. I don't think I have any extra special Linux knowledge above and beyond people. The more I learn about Linux, the more I realize I don't know. But I think now is the time. And here's why. First, Windows 10 is becoming end of support in October, which means you will no longer get patches for Windows 10. Windows 11 has hardware requirements for things such as you need at least a 7th gen Intel processor and a TPM 2.0. How many people here have computers that don't meet those specifications? A lot of us, right? I think in Linux you can go all the way back to a 586 and it's still supported in the kernel. So I don't think you should run that system, but you can if you want to. Microsoft recall. Okay, moving on. Apple's hardware restrictions, right? We'll talk a little bit about that. The ARM platform is especially challenging for some that need to run software that isn't supported in the ARM platform. Back to Microsoft. Tries to require that you have a Microsoft account to install the operating system. Yes, there's ways around that, but it's still super annoying. And Microsoft has announced a couple of things. One that is on this slide is that they want to, when you have a kernel driver crash, have your Windows system connect to Microsoft and send them data. Hopefully we can control that feature and we're not just sending random data to Microsoft. So those are just some of the reasons why now I think is the time. I maybe won't go on a limb and say this is the year of the Linux desktop, but I mean, it could be. So what this presentation will not be like is me yelling at you to switch to Linux and other lies. Also, I won't poke fun at Microsoft Windows. I promise. I promise. I will also spare macOS users who, in order to get an upgraded hard drive space, have to use double-sided Velcro and an external storage plugged into the USB-C port because the chip is soldered on the board. And anyway, so what I will talk about is I want to debunk some myths as to the Linux and using it on the desktop. I used my social media outlets and I asked people to give me reasons why they don't use Linux on the desktop. Wow, I was ugly. It was ugly, but I have those summarized. We'll talk about why Linux is better operating system for security professionals, in my opinion, and some tips and tricks for using Linux on your desktop. Again, that's the GitHub repository. You may want to pick up some scripts there. Also, pull requests are always welcome if you want to clean up some of my scripts, which are, a little rough around the edges right now. So just a little bit about my Linux journey. Again, I don't have Linux superpowers, but in 1999, my friend gave me the stack of floppy disks to install Red Hat 5.2 on a system that I put out on the internet that was very quickly hacked with a whole bunch of wares on it. Right? I know. So I landed a job as a Unix/Linux systems administrator. I did a lot of admin for various operating systems, and I did have a Linux workstation as a secondary workstation. It was actually a little sun, tower-looking thing. It was awesome. Then I worked for a university, and at the university, they were like, well, do you want a Windows workstation or a Solaris workstation? I'm like, I think I know the answer to this, but what does everyone else run? We're like, oh, everyone else runs a Solaris workstation. I'm like, heck yeah, count me in. I'm like, but what about if we need to run Windows? Does anyone remember Remedy ticketing system? Yeah. And so we needed to run that. And so there was this card I had to plug into my Sun workstation that gave me a Windows box like inside my Sun workstation. It was amazing. In any case, there were some dark years where I did use Mac and Windows as my desktop. But coming out of that, in 2016, I did switch all of my laptops to Linux-based laptops. And then in 2019, I made the complete transition where today I have 2 laptops, 2 desktops, 10 plus computers that run my podcast. All of them are running Linux. I do keep at my studio and my house 1 Windows computer for just those times where I need a Windows computer, which happens. Okay, so now we'll go bust some myths. That, it's interesting, like, some people, like, get really fired up when I say you should use Linux on your desktop. Like, they're legit angry. Everyone take a breath. Let's have a moment of zen. And, keep an open mind for this presentation. You may walk out of here and go, I'm never using Linux, not for me. But if even just one of you walks out of this room and goes, I want to make the switch, my job here is done, and I'll sleep good tonight. So when I polled my social media about the top 10 reasons, had lots of conversations with my friends, met with people who have been using Linux or Unix longer than I've been alive. I had these conversations with everyone. I did the research, and these are the top 10 reasons that I came up with. It was about Microsoft Office documents. It was about software applications, hardware, not printing. Some people said, I have a life. Therefore, I won't run Linux on my desktop. Gaming on Linux sucks. I got a lot of feedback that I don't want to fiddle with it. And I probed some people, like, what does that really mean? I couldn't really get down to, I think it's about tweaking. I'm not quite sure, but I'll try and address it anyway. A lot of people were in the camp of, hey, I tried it years ago, and it didn't work, and so I'm back to a Mac, right? Also, pretty funny one, too, I don't want to compile my kernel. Okay, like I'm just telling you right now, we'll get to that. You don't have, if you want to, you can, right? But you don't have to. But let's talk about Office. This is everyone's common concern, right? So a couple of things. Mostly it's in the cloud, right? One of my reasons that was a great transition point for me was I got G Suite, and I could do Word and Google Slides and Office 365 or whatever in the cloud. Also, locally on Linux laptops, I was shocked as to how many people didn't use or know about OnlyOffice. OnlyOffice has a different lineage from LibreOffice, which was OpenOffice previously, and I think it works great. In fact, the slides that are up here on the screen are coming from OnlyOffice. I actually developed the presentation in Google Slides, copied it locally as a backup, which I had to use, and I'm using OnlyOffice to present. So, and I've done like light editing with it. It works totally fine. Also, Microsoft Edge runs great on Linux. Yes, they make a package of their browser for Linux, and yes, as a Linux user, I can tell you, like, it runs pretty great. I can sign in with my Microsoft account and run Edge and get access to email and all the things, and it runs great. So there's that. Other software that people might have concerns. Audio editing. All the podcasts that I produced today, which include Below the Surface from Eclypsium and our new show called The Hacker Syndicate. The audio editing is done with Audacity. You've also got Ardour. Video editing is all done in Kdenlive. Communications, all these applications work great on Linux. One you might not recognize is Pulse SMS. So that's my SMS client on my phone. And also installs on the desktop and syncs all of my text messages so I can read them just like you would if you had a Mac OS, right? Like I said, browsers, music, I use Spotify, and there's unofficial clients for YouTube Music. Photos is GIMP. Development is awesome support. 3D printing support, Bamboo Studio, we'll talk about that for a moment. It requires a little bit of tweaking. Kdenlive is impressive. A lot of people are like, oh, I can't use Linux because I have to do video editing. I edit every single episode of Below the Surface using Kdenlive. It's amazing. It has audio post-processing that takes out noise. So if you want to go to our YouTube channel and watch a video and see what the results look like, I think they look and sound great. So Kdenlive is great. Bamboo Studio needs a little bit of tweaking, all right? There's like this weird lineage with all of the slicer software, if anyone does How many people do 3D printing? A lot of people do 3D printing, some people, just a few. You know the slicer software is kind of weird, and they all share some kind of lineage with Orca and Prusa Slicer. And so I had to build this script because I read multiple articles about, well, if you're getting this error in Bamboo Studio, you need this setting and that setting. So I wrote a script that makes Bamboo Studio run much better. Also, Bamboo Studio doesn't like a dark theme. You won't be able to see certain settings. So one of these things in this script, I think it's your GTK theme. If you change that, it'll take care of that problem. So with a little bit of tweaking, your slicer runs fine. If you want this file, it's on my GitHub, and I give it away completely for free. Meetings, some people have a little anxiety about meetings. Google Meet, Zoom, everything works great for me in Linux. Even Teams works great in Linux. There's actually unofficial clients for Teams. Those work fine. The only thing, and I haven't had to use it in a while, is to be a presenter on GoToWebinar, you need Windows. And that's one reason why I'll keep a Windows system around in case. I haven't had to use GoToWebinar in quite some time. Also, the OBS Bot Meet 4K webcam is about $100. It's my favorite webcam. I've gone through my fair share of cameras and webcams. I think this one's great, and it runs awesome on Linux. Virtualization is wonderful on Linux. Now, obviously, you can do virtualization on any operating system. On Linux, VMware is free for all operating systems, runs great on Linux. KVM and libvirt is that inside the kernel virtualization, extremely performant. A little bit of a learning curve, but I got some tips to help you with that. So that's a great in terms of virtualization. Of course, containers run natively on Linux, and I'll share with you for the first time actually my brand new Nmap container that I built as an example. So on my GitHub are notes for using and installing KVM if you want to go down that route. I still, kind of rely on VMware Workstation to do my virtualization, but KVM is really, really awesome. libvirt, QEMU tied together. There's a graphical interface for it. It's super, super fast. So I have some install notes on that if you're curious. All right, display drivers. People are like, oh my God, NVIDIA display drivers. That's awful. It's terrible. It'll never work. And I can tell you today, it's perfectly fine. I want to say 3 years ago might have been the cutoff point when I had an issue with an NVIDIA display driver. I had to revert to a previous kernel, fix the issue, and then move forward. But since then, my NVIDIA display drivers, they're fine. But what's even more exciting is, well, there already is an open source version of NVIDIA Nuevo that is still in active development. However, developed by Red Hat is a Rust. Not that Rust is going to solve all of our problems. That's what they decided to develop it in. But they wrote it in Rust. It's a brand new open source driver for NVIDIA graphics cards, GPUs, that runs in the Linux kernel. So some are skeptical, but development is continuing, and I'm hopeful. Also, kernel.615 is a big, big update that is coming. I'm not on kernel 615 yet, still in experimental testing phases in most distributions, but most of the code that's updating in 615 are driver updates to support new hardware, which is awesome. So speaking of hardware support, this is one reason why we like running Linux, because the minimum system requirements, again, I was listening to a podcast, and they said we've just recently dropped support for 486 processors, and you can still run Linux on 586 and run a modern kernel on 586. So hardware support is getting better. Sometimes you just have to wait, so you need a little bit of patience perhaps to run Linux. For example, on this Framework 13 laptop, my screen brightness on certain kernels wouldn't work, but they've sorted that issue out, so sometimes you just got to wait, and now the modern kernel runs great and allows me to adjust the screen brightness. One thing for hardware support that I've noticed is that if I update my kernel on a Linux desktop, it goes in this weird state where if I plug a new USB device in, it won't recognize it because I have to reboot. And that's just a weird thing. It could be Manjaro, my distribution that I run, because use Arch, by the way. But what I struggled with was when I'm working with ESP32 devices and I'm trying to get it into bootloader mode and the serial port, I'm like, is it the hardware? is it Linux? But it turns out I just got to reboot. So, and like I said, kernel 6.15 is released, but still in experimental phases, but supports things like your Apple Touch Bar, gaming controllers, and again, most of the update, a lot of the code that's changing in there is to support hardware. So 6.15 is going to be, I think, even easier for people to get going on Linux because it will have better hardware support. The other complaint was, well, I can't print. Well, no one can print. Printers hate you. Don't we all know this, right? Does anyone have a good relationship with their printer? You have a good relationship with your printer.
And my Linux desktop.
And your Linux desktop. There you go. I find Ubuntu is pretty good about supporting printers. You have a good relationship with your printer? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, so you're better than all of us, because I get it. It's okay. It's okay. So, yeah, again, in Manjaro, I just haven't spent the time, to figure out how to print. I just print from my phone. If I need to print a document, I'll go on my phone. When I was running Ubuntu, I found a better experience with printers, but printers are problematic for a lot of reasons outside of your running Linux as your desktop. Not that running Linux on your desktop is going to help your printing per se, but again, the few times I need to print something in any given month or whatever is I use my phone. So I have a life. Yeah, I do too. And sometimes I do blame Linux. For example, my audio was all over the place. I was having some pretty regular problems with audio where I'd have to reboot and or unplug devices. I was blaming Linux, right, because we've got Alta and we've got Pulse Audio, and they've all tried to build on each other to try and fix the previous one's problems. And Pipewire is much better today. I think that's the theme of this talk. It's much better now. But I still blame Linux sometimes. And what happened with my computer is I was blaming Linux, but I did a BIOS UEFI update on my system, and it solved 99% of my audio USB issues. So it turned out there was some low-level driver issue that was causing that. So it really wasn't Linux. And I guess that's the point that I'm trying to make with I Have Life. A lot of times when I run into heinous problems, it's not necessarily Linux's fault. It's some hardware error, or it's user error on my part, or someone, one of my kids has come in and mucked with stuff, and I have to fix it. So, also, as a Linux user, I'm not the only one that has issues when we try and connect to a meeting and the audio doesn't work. I find a lot of people, the most common problem, like I've been doing a podcast for 20 years now, and we've got a lot of people come in remotely to get on the podcast. And one of the most common problems is you're overloading your USB bus. It's not your operating system, it's not the drivers, is you've got too much stuff plugged into your USB hub that isn't powered. And those problems are resolved. I just did this with one of my friends, Josh Marpet, who is testing out running Linux on one of his systems. He's like, I'm getting this weird error in OBS, it's not seeing my hardware. I'm like, do you have your USB plugged into a hub? He's like, yeah, I've got this great dongle. I'm like, no, you don't. Unplug that thing. Plug your camera directly in. Plug your USB audio device directly in. Then use your hub for everything else. And he's like, oh, yeah, everything works great now. So sometimes it's not Linux. Gaming, and look, if you're a hardcore gamer and you run Windows because you have to, because you need UEFI secure boot, because your game anti-cheat requires it, there's nothing I can do about that. You're just going to have to run Windows, and that's totally fine. I will still love and respect you if you are a gamer and you want to run Windows. If you do want to run games on top of Linux, that has also made significant improvements, particularly with Valve coming out with the Steam Deck that put a ton of development into Proton, which essentially Proton is a collection of virtualization technology that basically provides DirectX support and uses Wine to provide Windows facilities so that games can run on Linux. Valve has put a ton of development time, made it open source. It's pretty cool. There's a website. You can go look up which games are supported, ProtonDB. So gaming on Linux has gotten much better thanks to Valve and the introduction of Steam Deck and SteamOS 2. SteamOS is based on Arch Linux, ironically enough, is also being supported in other gaming systems, and is slowly getting to a point where we'll be able to install it on our desktops more easily. You can do it now, but it's wonky. I don't want to fiddle. So many people are maintaining packages for you to install, right? And so that means you have to fiddle less to get something to work. Believe me, I remember the days when we had to compile software by hand, up the hill both ways in the snow with no shoes on, and do things the manual way. Yes, I've got my scars from compiling SendMail on Solaris. We're far past that now, where other people are maintaining the Arch user repository, things like Snap app images and Flatpaks. Countless Linux distributions exist that are very much targeted at ease of use. And again, sometimes you just have to wait until developers release the fix and get things in sync. So Josh, who is my test subject for this presentation, I guess you could say, Josh wants to use a virtual camera in OBS and also run Manjaro on the latest kernel, and the kernel driver that provides the virtual camera isn't compatible with OBS. Now, the OBS folks are working on it, and we've been tracking the progress, and Josh is like, well, we can compile OBS all by ourselves and fix it. I'm like, all right, let's look into that. And then I looked and how it uses CMake and the whole build process, and I was like, yeah, let's not do that. Let's just wait. And so OBS did come out with a new version just like the other day. So Josh and I have to check to see if that supports. So sometimes you got to have a little patience. Yes, could we have gone in and start fiddling, compiling on our own, probably get really frustrated, or we can just wait and come up with a different workaround for the virtual camera until we have support. Okay, some people say, I tried, and things went badly, and I went back to Mac or Windows. Well, my thing is like, try it again. But don't try it again if everything has to work perfectly. There are some things you have to do in Linux that or experience in Linux that may not be the perfect or close to perfect environment that you want. If that's the case, maybe Linux isn't for you. If you don't want to learn Linux or it has absolutely no value in your career path, that may be another reason where I'm like, look, go run another operating system. It's totally fine. I think one of the things for security professionals is it gives us familiarity and experience with Linux that's valuable to the things we do in our careers. Also, if you're just so happy with Microsoft and Apple and all of your software, that's fine. There's no reason for you to switch then. It's totally cool. We can still hang out. It's fine. The other thing is, like, I don't want to compile anything. Look, today, many of us remember the older Linux kernel versions and how they maybe were not as performant or didn't support hardware, and you had to go in and manually compile your own kernel. And man, could that be painful. When we've progressed, hardware has progressed, Moore's Law, the Linux kernel has progressed to a point now where if you're going to go tweak your Linux kernel for your hardware, you're not going to gain that much, right? Most of the kernels that come with most Linux distributions today are fine for 99.9% of all the users out there. You're not going to gain performance switching around with kernels, recompiling kernels. It's not like the days of old. Also, software compiles itself during installation, oftentimes, especially on Arch Linux-based distributions, and usually it works just fine, or there's a precompiled version that you can get. You can compile something if you need to, and that's one of the benefits, obviously. However, what I caution people on when we're on the topic of compiling and or tweaking Linux to make it do what you want to do is don't challenge the system that much, right? If your software recommends XYZ, by all means use XYZ. I think we get ourselves into trouble when we try and go against the current. The example is Emba. Emba is a free and open source firmware image analysis tool. They recommend that you run on a very specific version of Ubuntu. And you go, I can make it run on any Linux distribution. I've been using Linux for all these years now. And then you fail miserably and you get frustrated. I took Emba and I built the exact same Ubuntu version that they recommended. I keep it in the VM, and guess what? It runs great. And guess what? I can get to reverse engineering firmware faster and not be fighting with trying to get it to run. Okay, so Why is Linux a great choice for security? Now that we've dispelled all the myths, so all the excuses that everyone has for not running Linux on your desktop, we're throwing them out the window. We've debunked all the myths, hopefully. Now we're getting to why for security professionals, and I wanted to be very clear that this is not Linux for everyone, right? And that may work for some people. It may work for less technical people. You may put grandma on Linux, and that's great. A lot of times a Chromebook is a better answer for that. But in this particular context, I want to talk about the Linux desktop for security professionals for us. And one of the things I like about running and maintaining Linux on my desktop is I keep my skills sharp, right? I'm not in a role today where I have to manage and maintain. Yeah, there's a lot of Linux memes in here, and at the end, there's a whole bunch of bonus memes that I hope I have time to because they're like really funny. So I like to run Linux and experience a problem. I'm like this weird kind of person that when there's a heinous problem with one of my desktops, I'm like, you know, I enjoy this. I like yearn to have a problem that I have to dig into that I can't figure out. It's like a puzzle that I have to go figure out. I actually really like it when there's a problem because coming out of that, I've learned something, right? I've learned something that I can apply to my job, that I can apply in the next meeting at work when they go, hey, what about this grub update? I'm like, oh, I just banged my head against the wall for like 3 or 4 hours trying to figure this out on all my Linux devices, and now I understand exactly what you're talking about, right? So I think it's great for keeping your skills sharp, for having problems, reading release notes, figuring out dependencies, the whole thing. One of my tips, if you are going to run Linux, like I said, I use Manjaro Linux, and Manjaro is a rolling release, so I get updates all the time, and I get fairly frequent, like big, stable updates. Whenever there's one of those, I go read all of the release notes. They post it in the forum, and in there, they will have the things you should look out for, things you should do before you apply this update, and users' comments of, hey, I ran this and I had this problem and here's how I solved it. So I go read that first, and then I go apply the update. But my other tip is to have more than one system or have good backups of your current system, or both. Like I said, I have 2 laptops and 2 desktops. I'm very religious about going in, updating my systems, but if it blows up, I have a system I can go to, not update that one until I can carve out some time, right, to get back to it. If I have a very busy day, that may be the strategy. Hey, I tried the update, it didn't work, now I'm just going to switch computers. And that's really for any operating system, right? So the other reason for security professionals, why I believe this is important, is threat actors are targeting Linux more than ever before. I gave a presentation at BrewCon in 2010, and I don't want to say I had a crystal ball, but my talk was embedded device security and my plot to take over the world. And it was all about how to target IoT devices in a particular region, exploit vulnerabilities to make money and gain enough power to take over the world. And now I look at what's happening in the threat landscape today. I'm like, damn it, they watched my talk. And now they're doing things that I hadn't even considered, in the past 15 years. And they're targeting a whole bunch of ASUS routers, and they're turning them into proxies, intercepting the traffic, looking for new 0 days. I didn't think of that one, believe me. But that's one reason why being familiar with Linux today as a security professional is important. These network and security appliances are largely Linux-based. There is a ton of Linux-based, ARM-based Linux devices right now on the internet. In fact, Bruce, you talked about your computer inside your computer. Your BMC, baseboard management controller, is largely an ARM-based chip that is running Linux. It's actually, most of them are based on OpenBMC, which is a Yocto build of OpenBMC. And there's tons of them out there. So Linux malware also likes to live off the land, and having this knowledge of Linux allows you to help your teams do forensics, incident response. A part of my job, day job at Eclypsium, is paying attention to the threat landscape and advising research and engineering. Hey, how can we detect this? What is the best way to detect this particular thing that's happening on Linux? Okay, security tools on Linux. I think one of the reasons that I made the switch is that I found I would set up my Mac or Windows desktop, and then I'd have this other Linux thing where I was doing most of my work and running a whole bunch of security tools. And I was like, well, why can't I just flip that around and use Linux as my desktop, and then just use Windows if I need to do something Windows specific? And what I love about Linux is a lot of these tools are native to Linux, compiled on Linux. They are packaged on Linux. If you go into the Arch user repository, you can find a whole bunch of security tools that someone else has already packaged to install on Linux. And with one command, I can just install it. I don't have to go through a lot of work to download, compile, do dependencies on a pretty good number of security tools, which helps me in my day job when I need to look at this UEFI image. Well, UEFI tool is a one-line command. It installs, and I'm off to the races, which is great. So that's my other tip, is use those pre-built packages, containers, virtual machines, Python, to avoid corrupting your system, right? So every time I use, if I get some Python from GitHub that's a project that I want to test out and or run, I create a virtual environment for that, and I don't try and maintain all those dependencies on my system, which is important. So this is my Nmap build. Now, granted, you could run containers in a lot of different environments. I like that they run natively on Linux. Oftentimes, Linux distributions will not include the latest versions of that security tool. Now, Manjaro being Arch-based, they do a pretty good job keeping up with it. However, sometimes you might be in an environment where, hey, I want the latest Nmap and I want the latest Vulner script. So I built a multi-stage Docker file, a build script for a Docker container, because I like working with containers, and apparently I have too much time on my hands, so I decided to be really fancy and do a multi-stage Docker build. So this is the first stage of the Docker container build, where it's pulling down all the requirements to build Nmap. It's pulling down Nmap. It has my little kludge because the versioning was off between automake and AC local in the build process. So that's kind of a little kludge because I'm building it on an Ubuntu 25.04 container. And you can see that as builder at the top means it's just one stage of the build. Then I actually build Nmap. It's a custom Nmap build without the graphical tools and a lot of the other utilities that would come with Nmap by default. It also gets the latest Vulner scripts, right, which compares, hey, Nmap found that this version of software is listening on this port. It matches it with the Vulner's database and says it has these vulnerabilities. Okay, it's not great, but it's pretty good. Let's just leave it at that, right? And then this is the final stage of the build, where I create a new Docker layer. I put the requirements for Nmap in there. I copy the previous build from the previous layer, and I set my entry point. I've also got other scripts that I want to upload to that basically alias a shell script so that when you run Nmap, it runs it from the container. And then updating this is really easy. You can just go rebuild your container. Okay, so that was an example of security tools on Linux. The other thing is, freedom is nice, because if you want to do something in Linux, you can. And this is one of my favorite memes. I mean, on social media went crazy over this, because if you can just picture like the penguin sitting there going, yeah, you're gonna delete your bootloader? Yeah, totally fine, it's cool, right? And then you're on Windows. Windows like, you can't remove Edge. What are you, crazy? So you're less likely to be forced into certain hardware, software, because it is free and open. You can use whatever hardware you want. Again, there's vast hardware support in Linux. Now, a lot of people's primary reason for running Linux is also privacy focused too, right? You don't have to send that telemetry back and all of that stuff. So there is a certain amount of freedom, but also with freedom comes great responsibility. If, for example, your good friend tells you, hey, don't try and use Autopsy, which is a forensic software, on Linux, because it will end badly. You should just run that on Windows. And this is coming from someone who knows Linux very, very well. And I was like, Dave, you're crazy. I'm going to try it on Linux. And then it blew up in my face. And then I realized I should listen to Dave. So that's the moral of the story. So which Linux distribution should you use? This is a hotly debated topic. I can say there's one thing. Please, please, for the love of God, don't use Kali as your desktop. Please. It wasn't designed for that. Stop doing that. I love, obviously, Arch Linux-based distributions, largely because of the Arch user repository, which are pre-packaged software packages that run on Linux that can be used in Arch-based Linux distributions. I love this. Now, some of you might be thinking, Paul, what about the supply chain? I'm like, yeah, could be a bad day if one of those package maintainers gets hacked, or the Russians come to them with a big duffel bag full of money and say, make sure you backdoor this software for us. So that is a concern. But we all have to live with some amount of risk. Ubuntu-based distributions are great. It's a little more polished in terms, like I said, printing works great in Ubuntu. It's great for specific applications. My systems that run my podcast, that connect to Riverside to broadcast us, they're Ubuntu, regular Ubuntu distributions. Stick to what's popular, especially if you're first making the switch. Like, there's a lot of Linux distributions out there. There was even a Montana Linux distribution. You can go look that up and thank me later, because it's just epic. You can also do like Linux from scratch, or run Gentoo or straight Arch. Again, these fall in the category very tedious. You're going to do a lot of fiddling if you use those. And if that's your thing, that's fine. But if you're first making the switch, not my recommendation. Okay, updates are important. And this was just kind of like a personal story for me that I thought was pretty compelling and reinforced why I love running Linux so much. Because I got into my podcast studio, and there's probably 6 or 7 different Linux machines that when I got into the studio on a Wednesday morning, which is the day I do Paul Security Weekly, I'm like, this is my time. Wednesday morning, I update all of my studio Linux systems. And I march through. I put a pot of coffee on. I march through. I use a great tool called TopGrade. I'll do a technical segment on it. I've talked about it on the show. You can search for TopGrade. It's friggin' awesome. I ran that, updated all my systems. Before my coffee was finished, got a cup of coffee, checked on my Windows laptop that I had started my Windows update, and it was still going and kept going for several hours after that, to the point where I'm like, if I needed this for the show, it could be dicey. So that's one reason why I like running Linux. I also have a Windows VM that won't work and errors out every time I try and update it. But the nice part, I think, also about running Linux as a security professional is this last point right here, right? You get to test these new vulnerabilities, exploits, and remediation process yourself because it's in your critical path. I think there's one thing to have a Linux machine sitting there that maybe you tinker around with, but that's not in your critical path. When you're using it as your desktop, and it is in your critical path of productivity, you get to experience being your own sysadmin, which comes with not just responsibility and headaches, but also a great experience to say, hey, my example here is Grub. February of this year, we discovered, it would turn out later, Microsoft's AI software tool would discover 30 some odd vulnerabilities in Grub and other bootloaders. Grub then has to apply those updates. Those updates have to trickle down into Linux distributions. We had to be able to identify, well, which distributions are pushing out a new Grub? Are they updating the UEFI DBX for secure boot? Are they updating shim? Are they using an SBAT policy on there? And since I use Linux on my desktops, I was able to track that and go, yeah, my distribution hasn't updated yet. This one did. When I got the update, it didn't apply it automatically because it's Arch-based. And so I had to run this other utility that updates my Grub. So I gained all of these insights, which ultimately helped my day job, research and engineers, understand what was happening in the real world. And so that's why I think is one of the benefits of running Linux on your desktop. So I did an episode that will air today or tomorrow. We pre-recorded this. I did a technical segment on updating your Linux systems, where I did cover my own update script. So I wrote my own update script for Manjaro. If you go to my GitHub, I've released it for the first time ever. So it's out there. And again, I'm going to accept pull requests, so if you want to help improve it, that's great. But it helps me keep my systems up to date and does certain things that I describe in this technical segment that allow you to have, I think, a better time updating your systems, right? It does some things before the installation, updates my mirrors, which I believe is important. Make sure you get a fresh list of mirrors. They have a fresh list of software. Definitely helps avoid errors when you're doing that. And also, after you apply the update, diffing the various files. Let's say a package came down and it wants to put a new configuration file for OS query, but you already have a configuration file. Well, now you have to do a diff and determine what you want to do. You want to merge them? You want to accept the new one? Do you want to ignore the new one entirely? So those are all things that are part of the upgrade process. That my script does some of it. TopGrade does a much better job. I talk about both in Pulse Security Weekly, episode number 877. Okay, so in conclusion, if you've tried Linux before, give it another shot. It's much better now. Trust me, it's much better now. Come to the dark side. We have Linux, we have cookies, it's going to be wonderful. If you haven't tried Linux on your desktop, now is a great time. If you've got older hardware sitting around running Windows 10, you don't want to upgrade to Windows 11, you're done with the weather reports and advertisements and all that crap in your start menu and not being able to remove your web browser, then come try Linux. This is a great time to give it a try, whether you've tried it before or you're new to using Linux. One of the things that unfolded as I was developing this talk, and I couldn't have timed it any better, is other people started catching on to the fact that Windows 10 is going away, that people are frustrated with Windows on their desktops. PewDiePie released a video that got 10 million views or something ridiculous about that because he's like, hey, I'm using this thing called Linux, and man, is it awesome, and man, is there some super annoying thing? And I'm like, yeah, preach. Like, what? That's what I've been saying. That video, the introduction of the initiative called End of 10, so if you go to endof10.org, a lot of open source developers are contributing to this effort to get people to install Linux on their desktops. And the way they're doing it is volunteers are setting up centers to help people. You come in and you get some Linux nerd that's going to help you install Linux. What's better than that, right? So if you want to be involved, maybe you've got a local hackerspace or whatever, you can go register that and help people install Linux, which is awesome. Did I mention I used Arch, by the way? I'm obligated to say that because there is a license agreement for Linux. I don't know if people realize this, though, but the license agreement states, I promise that I'll tell every person without asking why Linux is so much better than every other operating system. I got the Linux Gold Star today because there's a lot of people in the audience, and I just gave an hour talk about how Linux is awesome. So there's that. We started this new thing. You may recognize Pulse Security Weekly, but we started this new thing called the Hacker Syndicate. It has no affiliation with anything other than myself and my amazing friends. That's actually what I call it. I'm like, join the Hacker Syndicate live stream for Paul and his amazing friends. If you get the reference to Spider-Man and his amazing friends, it's a great cartoon. You can follow my socials for the schedule. Like, really, you can just hang out with us for an hour and a half, which is awesome. Again, all the files and stuff are on the GitHub, including the slides. So if there's something on a slide you want to go back to, it's there. And don't be shy about pull requests. And how much time do we have? Oh, we have time for questions and bonus memes. This is like the memes that didn't make the cut to be in the presentation. Does anyone know what movie this is from? Terminator 2. All of you are so much better than AI, because AI could not tell me, because I couldn't for the life of me remember where it came from, and ChatGPT said this is from the movie Hackers, which I was like, what? This is just hilarious. Perplexity said it's from the movie Office Space. I'm like, that actor's skin color doesn't even match. What are you talking about? It's so ridiculous. And then Adrian Sanabria in our group chat was like, no, dude, that's Terminator 2. And I was like, oh, yeah, now I remember. That's awesome. So, yeah, there's just a lot of, like, memes that, you know, again, just, like, didn't make the cut. But in my heart, I couldn't, like, I couldn't remove them from the presentation. So I had to leave them in. And I think I've got, like, the world's greatest collection of Linux memes. This one's pretty funny. This is a user who posted in a public Facebook forum and said it took him 40 minutes to install Spotify. And everyone's like, I'm like a Manjaro Arch user, and I'm like, yeah, you just Pac-Man install Spotify, and it installs. I don't know what you're talking about, but it kind of speaks to people's preconceived notions that it's really hard to install software on Linux, but it's really not. So yeah, there's just like a lot of memes out there that, you know, I think, yeah. So this is one of my favorites. This is, yeah. This was popular on social media. That you were the chosen one. I'm sure most of you get that reference. Like you were supposed to protect the processes that crash, not become one of them. Yep, task manager. I think of this when I was getting on the airplane. Do you want to be next to me on the airplane or a hungry pack of wolves? Yeah. Yeah, and then, you know, the evolution of the trash icon, I mean, that's pretty good. That's pretty good, right? That's pretty good. I mean, we all didn't want to install Windows 10. Now we don't want to install Windows 11. We're all in love with Windows 10. I don't know if I want to play this video game, but, I mean, it could be fun if, you know, can you make it work video game. This guy was great. Gareth, if you're out there, love you, man. I don't want the weather, tabloid headlines, programs I don't have installed, search the web via Bing, and engage in an LLM conversation in my start menu. Like, I just want to launch programs. That's what I want my start menu for, not all that other crap. I'm with you there. This could be fun. Future versions of this talk may incorporate a game where we choose a color of our operating system and, I don't know, engage in conversation about the differences between Mac OS and Windows, because that sounds fun, I suppose. And also, this was my Windows Update experience, because it takes a really long time. Yeah, so that's my presentation. Any questions? Oh, no. Other than Bruce, any questions? I'm just kidding, Bruce. Did you?
I was just depressed it took to the last 30 seconds that you had FreeBSD on a slide.
Oh, I know. I did ignore BSD. It's a good one. Yeah. You didn't explain what MRTG was in your presentation, so.
Okay. All right. How do you install progressive web apps on Linux?
You don't want that at all, ever. On Linux or any operating system, I think. In all honesty, I haven't looked into that. What I found is that things like Teams that would install as a progressive web app, like I just couldn't find how you would do that. Like I literally couldn't find the instructions. But then I saw that somehow developers were able to create their own Teams actual client, which is probably just a bunch of JavaScript NPM, Node JS code that runs locally, and they made their own clients. So that I would look for the actual application other than a progressive web app. Any other questions? How many people are going to leave here and at least try Linux on their desktop if you're not using Linux today? Thank you. Thank you. My job here is done. Thank you.